So I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 15th, 2022. It's a regular meeting of the Board of Finance. The first item or second item on our agenda will be public comment. No one has emailed in that they wanted to speak, but we do have two people here in person that wanted to speak. Lori Olson. And Jen, do we have the mic? Is the mic turned on? Or?
It should be.
Okay.
We're going to find out.
Welcome, Lori.
Thank you. No, I don't think it's on. Is it on?
I don't think it actually feeds into here. I think it's just for
They
channel
just record
79.
it.
Gotcha.
It doesn't like
Okay.
broadcast.
Lori Olson. I am the co-chair of CDSP. I live at 16 Littlebrook Road North. The Board of Education fiscal year 22-23 budget is the largest component of the Darien budget. We're concerned since the Board of Finance has not discussed the budget in public thus far, and it's not on tonight's agenda. At this point, the public has no idea what the Board of Finance is thinking. If there is to be a reduction of the Board of Education budget, the public will not learn until the Board of Ed administration work session on March 29th. That leaves only two opportunities for the public to engage in the process through public comment, and the second of those opportunities on the same night as the Board of Finance vote. The Board of Education deliberated on the budget 5 times between when it was presented and when it was voted on. You have carved out one session. The RTM Finance Budget and Committee and Education Committee have discussed it through multiple meetings that included Dr. Adley and Duke Deneen. A sound budget process should include clear communication from the Board of Finance to the administration about its expectation and transparency so parents can absorb the information and react. The old cliche is that budgets are, at their essence, statements of values. At this stage of the pandemic, where Darien students need as much support as possible, the Board of Finance should prioritize students. The budget approved by the Board of Ed includes 3.74% growth, while the town's budget overall growth is at 9%. A community like Darien should not be balancing its budget by cutting services from its most at-risk groups. Darien students, like the rest of those in America, have survived an unprecedented global health-driven interruption. We have no idea what resources it will take to get them back on track. Several new initiatives were not approved by the Board of Ed in order to focus resources on student remediation and recovery. It would be disingenuous to both parents and students should this board choose to reduce their resources even further. We request that the Board of Finance engage in the discussions this evening to go on the public record with its intentions so that parents have ample opportunity to respond. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Lori. Krista Carnes.
Hi, I'm Krista Carnes. I'm at 40 Fitch Avenue. I just recently shared an editorial in The Patch, and just because I only have 3 minutes here, I'm editing it down for clarity as well as for length. The experience of the pandemic brought out the best in many of us. The care we showed our neighbors, our friends, and our families. It also highlighted those professionals who work to keep us moving forward, some days only by inches, as we navigated wildly new, unknown territory. Our healthcare professionals, first responders, frontline workers, maintenance crews, and our teachers. Town and school district employees went above and beyond in the service of our town and our children. Educators in particular shouldered a complete upheaval of their profession while keeping up the demands of local and state reporting requirements. My son is in special education, and I know those well. And they did so while at home, managing their own families and their health. In recognition of these intense efforts, some area towns have chosen to recognize the extreme circumstances teachers face and compensate them. New Canaan is one very local example, which provided thank you bonuses from their town fund. Currently, there's no plan of any of the $6.3 million ARPA funds to recognize teachers who worked tirelessly without overtime compensation. The idea of bonuses for town employees was deemed too controversial or too complicated, and teacher bonus inquiries were deflected to the Board of Education, which has focused its $100,000 ARPA funds on running the schools and providing direct instruction and support to students. Currently proposed projects for the ARPA funds include addressing pre-pandemic issues that would have needed future funding in any case. Playground overhauls, an upgrade to the town government website, various town signage. Other suggested new uses are vague, such as mental health support, but does sound promising. These projects may need to get done, but as a town, can't we find a way to do both? Are we just not willing? Can we address some pre-pandemic problems and also acknowledge that those who helped us get through the pandemic? The ARPA committee may have met in public Zoom sessions to discuss these issues, but given that we're talking about millions of dollars of investments, there should be significant public input before final decisions. An active and engaged community conversation is not unreasonable. The entire list of suggested allocations before you does not need to be approved tonight. You can approve certain line items for really important capital improvement projects like flood mitigation, which generated 100 people at their, public comment, infrastructure upgrades and the like. But you can choose to wait on finalizing the terms of it a lot in the everything else bucket. These funds do not need to be obligated until the end of 2024 calendar year. What's the harm in taking a little more time to gather input and ideas? The ARPA committee is made up of a handful of people and dedicated, and I thank them for their work, but there was only one public comment recorded. I don't think that's sufficient. We need to adhere to the words outlined in Mr. Palin's State of the Town address. New views and new ideas are good. Success will come from collaboration, transparency, inclusion, and civility from all involved. I hope we will reinforce the values of our teachers beyond mere words with these funds.
Thanks, Krista. If you want to send me a copy of that, we can attach it to the minutes if you want.
Absolutely, thank
Okay?
you.
Thanks. Anyone else in the audience? Public comment? Okay. Well, thank you all. Okay, so the third item on the agenda is to discuss and take action on a special appropriation for the ARPA funds in an amount of $6.43 million and change. By way of background, I think approximately 6 or 7 months ago, the first selectman created a committee which was populated by various individuals on elected individuals on boards as well as other community leaders to discuss and work with staff and include community input on how to best allocate the $6.4 million that half of which we received, the other half we'll receive in the next couple months. As you know, over that period, they met number of meetings, I think 5 or 6 meetings in public, and ultimately made a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen voted on that unanimously on February 28th, and that was put before our board back on March 1st. But I thought, I think we all generally agreed that we would take a little bit more time to look through the individual items, get some more input from staff, and answer some of the questions that we have. And so over the past 2 weeks, we've submitted some questions, and Jen and Kate have worked with the various department heads to get us a little bit more detail on a few of those. So I guess to kick off the discussion here, I would ask, is there a motion to propose that the Board of Finance accept the recommendations from the committee and from the Board of Selectmen as to the allocation of the $6.43 million. If there's a motion in a second, I would then say we move into our board's discussion on the topic.
So moved. Second.
Dan? Second, okay. So let me open up for questions, that anyone has either regarding the process or on any of the individual items. Jen and Kate and worked with staff to put together a number of answers to our questions. And so I guess I would open it up. We have John Zagrodzky here, who chaired the ARPA committee. Dan, served on that, as well as, and Kevin and others here that can answer questions if we need it.
Just a comment. The fact that there may not be questions tonight doesn't mean there haven't been dozens of questions over the last 2 weeks that this board has asked of the town and of the committee. And if there aren't questions tonight, that means that those questions have been satisfied. So don't think for a second that because we may not be discussing it tonight, that it hasn't been discussed robustly over the past couple of weeks.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make a few comments. I think when I look through this list and I listen to them, to the ARPA committee sort of debate this and so forth, I think it strikes a good balance between using like the 6.4 million plus million that we received under the ARPA grant to deal with a handful of what I view as sort of urgent and absolutely necessary infrastructure projects that we would either need to pay for that were already on the table in this budget process, and we saw about $570,000 that are going to be reallocated from the town, from the Board of Selectmen's capital program to the ARPA grant. So that would, all else being equal, bring down the tax bill to residents by about $570,000. But when I look through some of these other projects, these are all projects that, Ed and his team on Public Works have been before us for, small grants, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to start a lot of the design work, including the work on, the sort of Tilly Pond, Grove Street area, the Salt Box Lane area, Old Kings Highway area, and I think, including things which he sort of put us on notice a few months ago about the Rings End Bridge. We've been discussing the repairing the base, the dam, but now also the DOT has recommended that we need to make some repairs to the bridge itself to be in compliance and so forth. So I think it strikes a good balance of, things that were going to have to be funded by, in one of the budgets this year or the next couple of years, and alleviate some of the pressure there. And when I look through some of the other sort of non-infrastructure related projects, I think it's hits on a lot of topics from repairing 20 to 30-year-old playgrounds at our various parks, which are obviously getting, based on the last couple of years, a lot more intense use. Things such as mental health, which I think the Board of Selectmen has been pretty clear about, that they plan to, over the next few years, sort of dole out to, or I should say allocate to different organizations to deal with mental health issues that could arise in town. And there's also, there's certain amounts in here that'll go towards our sort of social and community budget, which will be used to support any of our residents that have might be having financial needs as it relates to anything from home heating to mortgage to sort of, other problems they might be incurring. So I think it strikes a good balance between, kind of larger infrastructure projects, which were right in the sort of crosshairs of our budget, to sort of other things that I think will really benefit the community. So I fully support, this. One thing I mentioned on the last budget that I would say one of the items in here regarding the Rings End bridge, and this is sort of the repair of the bridge, which is in the actual ARPA allocation here, and Ed has another project in front of us, which is an almost near identical dollar amount, 160 or 163,000, I forgot which is which, for the design work on the repair of the sort of riprap around the dam and the sort of footings. That's one project, Jen, we had talked about, I spoke to Ed about, that I really think the town should quickly figure out the ownership and or lease issues around before allocating that. And so, one of the things I would sort of propose to the board is to, in connection with that one project, and Jen, look for your guidance as well, as do we need to sort of make the beginning of that project either contingent on figuring that out, or contingent upon like this board sort of okaying and understanding sort of what the ownership issue is, or should we just, our concerns have been noted and that'll be settled by staff and the department heads.
So if you just approve it as is, then as soon as Ed has his estimate, and as long as it's within the budget that's in here, he can begin the work. We as staff understand that we kind of want to look at Rings End as a whole, and with the other study that Ed wants to do, and again, looking at all those questions, maybe treat it as one kind of combined project. You won't have the control to do that if you just approve it as is. If you approve this with the condition that for that one item, you want that department head to come back to you in order to release the funds, so that you can have a discussion about the whole project, all those questions that you had about ownership and release and all of that. You can do that with the restrictions, and it won't be as lengthy of a process for Ed to come back. It'll just be to come back to Board of Selectmen and to you to release the funds. No need to go to the RTM, and it'll be pretty quick.
Okay. And I guess if we were going to make, we'd technically just be making that recommendation to the RTM as to suggesting that we approve it, or would we be approving it contingent upon that?
You would be approving it with the condition that that one project requires the department to come back to you to release the funds.
Okay.
The only thing else I would offer is that I think it's just over 90% of this recommended application of the ARPA funds is direct tax relief for our taxpayers, either in this year's budget or in future budgets. These are projects that would be approved in future budgets or in this year's budget. And the 10% that isn't a direct budget or tax reduction are the mental health grants, the food insecurity grants, the not-for-profit grants that are investing in our community that may actually be part of the budget. We would have a conversation about that in future budget years, and we may very well authorize that. But the 10% is investing in our community in a very significant way. So I just want to remind everyone that 90% of it is direct tax relief either this year or in future years.
As far as what we were just talking about with the approval of the release of the funds, I thought that was also the case with like the infrastructure projects. We're going to be getting another presentation on those as we get closer and get bids and get specs on those projects, right?
Well, I think, the staff's done, well, I don't know, Jeff, you want to talk to us just in terms of the level of detail that, I think, on those other infrastructure projects?
So most of them are pretty well estimated. The others are, I think it's Salt Box Lane is dependent on the results of one of the studies that you guys recently approved. But I think the way we need to look at it is with our appropriation process. If we allocate 1.5 million of ARPA funds through this process for a particular project, if the estimates come back higher than that, we cannot begin work on it without coming back to you to increase that appropriation. So if the concern is that what if the estimates come in higher and now we're spending more and maybe we don't want to spend that much on the project, we would have to come back to you to spend more than what is on this list.
Now, is there a scenario where we spend the 1.5 and come back for more, or they won't spend any money if that's?
We wouldn't spend any money because if the purpose of what that project is greater than what the estimate is, we would come back to you and say to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish with the ARPA grants is going to take this much more money.
And so I guess I would say, while I kind of originally recommended that a bunch of those other projects come back to us, having thought about this a little bit more, I think, those projects that are well-defined, staff, particularly, I think Ed and Jen and Kate sort of all, being involved in this, I trust that if those projects are going to run over or don't fit sort of within the budgets and so forth that they've been designed or materially different, they're going to come back to us anyway. But like Jen said, normally if this was part of a normal budget appropriation, we would approach, much like $1 million worth of sidewalks, if you will. Once we appropriate it, they'll need to come back to us in terms of, how the sidewalk works around a tree and so forth. So I think the only real one that I had the concern with, Taylor, I think is back to the Rings End Bridge. And that was more so not because of the project itself, but because there's this notion of the lease and the ownership or sort of other things, like kind of financial issues that are stapled to that I thought it would be helpful for this board to be able to sign off. Because I would imagine if we sign a new lease on that or any other solution moving forward, that would probably come back before us anyway, right?
So we have to make any kind of amendment to carve that out, or?
So right now, if you appropriate the 163, but with the condition that Ed come back to you. When Ed is ready to move forward and we have all those questions answered, he would come to you and say, I'd like to proceed with the project. My estimates are still within the 163 and we've answered all these questions and we'd like to move forward. You would say, yes, okay, we release the funds. If you feel that there's some other questions that haven't been answered or that you're still uncomfortable with any arrangement on the lease or anything like that, at that point you can say, no, we're still not comfortable releasing the funds. We need this additional information.
And Jen, in connection with it, they come back to us with a new lease in a month from now or 2 months from now. We could actually just pre-release the funds
Right.
the minute the lease or ownership issue or whatever is
Yep.
sort of cleared up. So we're not necessarily holding them up
Right.
by getting these particularly the bridge itself, important repairs done.
Do we need a motion for that to add that contingency?
I think you could make a motion to approve the list with the condition that the Rings End Road Bridge funds not be released without additional Board of Finance approval, something along those lines.
So is there a motion to amend the amendment to include our approval subject only to the Rings End, the release of the Rings End bridge money? Charlotte? Taylor? Move.
Flattered.
John, second. All those in favor of that amendment? Okay.
I do have one question, Jim. And can you differentiate between the 6.4 that we're discussing tonight and the amount that is being allocated to the Board of Education?
So the 6.4 is all part of an ARPA grant, which the town, which went directly to the town. We've received half of it, and the other half comes in June. The Board of Ed separately, over the past 20 months, I believe, has received a series of 7 or 8 different grants, completely separate and distinct from the 6.4. There were a couple smaller state grants. I don't have the acronyms for those specific ones. And then there were a couple ARPA-related grants that were part of sort of the larger American Recovery Act, which I think one of them totaled $1 million and change. Another one was a few more $100,000. And then there were 2 other grants, and Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. When you add all those grants up in totality, they're just under $2.5 million that the Board of Ed received under ARPA and ESSER grants. Those grants, they have spent all but $250,000 of. About $25,000 is being spent in the next couple months to finish out the current fiscal year, according to Rich Rudel, and another $225, which will sort of close out the totality of their grants, is, as you can see in the budget books and what the board approved, is going to be used as part of next year's sort of educational delivery to cover 2 staff plus their benefits and so forth. So they've effectively allocated all of their grants.
So that's separate and distinct and not subject to Board of Finance review?
Correct. So if you look at it in totality, what the town has received, about $6.4 million of ARPA grants. The town received a couple other smaller grants right during the height of COVID, and then the Board of Ed received in totality about 2.4. I think if you added them all up, you'd be close to $9.5 million that the town and board received, and then businesses obviously in town were eligible to receive other PPP and PSP related grants, which didn't necessarily flow through the town. Those flowed directly to residents and or businesses.
And there's about $500,000 for human services. I was wondering if Dan or John could go through the specifics. I can see the titles, but is there a greater plan than just allocating that amount of funds to that agency or that line item?
You're talking about, okay, so you're talking about the 4 items
Right.
that collectively total.
Yeah. Mental health, food insecurity, other
$525,000.
nonprofits, and emergency assistance.
Yeah, this is, and John helped me with this, and Jen as well, but this is meant to set aside funds for the town to allocate to certain profit and not-for-profit agencies that serve different needs within the community, including mental health, food insecurity, other types of issues or needs that the community, but that would be in the other nonprofit bucket. And then the emergency assistance is that some of the rent relief and those kinds of things are expiring, and that there's an anticipation, or there's we want to make sure that any residents that need further assistance, that we have some funds set aside to help them. So that's, if that answers your question.
And if my understanding is correct, for the larger mental health portion, that larger number, there's going to be a formal grant application and approval process that follows the traditional town rules for that. So there will be a thorough, application. It's pretty lengthy with questions that they have to provide, and it will be reviewed and then subsequently approved.
And that'll be even beyond mental health for the food insecurity, the nonprofits. The only one that the town will administer themselves through the Human Services Department is the emergency assistance, which we do have some of that in the budget anyway, a very small amount, but this will definitely supplement those funds.
If I have this right, Ally will, on the other three, Ally will propose to a committee that will be formed to basically, I'd like to allocate these monies this way.
We will actually have a grant application that outside organizations can apply for, so we can identify what their need are.
Right.
See, make sure that what they want to do with it fits under ARPA eligibility. And then we'll probably have some kind of a panel that reviews them.
Right.
Ally will be a big part of that.
Right.
Develop a recommendation, bring the recommendations to the Board of Selectmen.
Right, so ultimately, the Board of Selectmen will sign off on the recommendations of that panel
Right.
and Ally. Thank you.
Did you say some for-profit organizations on the list?
I thought I saw in the write-up that there was, that I might have that wrong.
We don't have any organizations on the list right now. We haven't done the formal process, but for-profits are eligible under ARPA for certain categories. So they may choose to apply and they would get evaluated as part of the process as well.
But their use would be outlined. So if a for-profit came and said, we'd like to apply for $10,000 of grant to help the community in this way,
Correct.
the Board of Selectmen and staff will look at what that use is.
Correct.
And I think, regarding the, the emergency assistance, even though we only have a small amount sort of built into the budget, taxpayer funded, doesn't she also administer certain donations that
Yes,
are
she
made?
has a gift
So it's a
fund.
much larger fund that she administers.
And that's what enables us to have such a small amount that is tax supported in the budget, because there are very generous folks who donate to that gift fund.
Okay, and I guess I would also point out that, when you look through the spreadsheet here, there's $121,000 of a contingency. So the idea, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but so we'll have a contingency account, which 121 will be in. To the extent any one of these large infrastructure projects, which total about 3.8 million, were to have a little bit of an overage or something, or need a little bit of additional amounts, they could come back to the Board of Finance, and we could transfer amounts out of that into there. And conversely, like any other capital account, that we sort of treat our reserve account, if you will, for taxpayer funded capital, if there was excess, if $1 million project only came in at $950,000, that extra $50,000 would go back into that contingency account, and we'd use those to support the various projects. If you can see the spreadsheet that includes, that they sent around, updated sort of expected start and finish dates for most of these projects, all of which are designed to be started before, most of which in 2022, some in 2023, and most finished in 2023, I think, except for one that might stretch to 2024. And I think that certainly coincides with, as you know, as part of this grant, everything needs to be identified and allocated by the end of 2024, right? And then spent by the end of 2026. So to the extent that contingency is left over, or we have more or less, that would then go, as we approach, sort of get into 2024, that would go back to the Board of Selectmen to identify, new projects for that, so we can have it allocated by the end of 2024.
Yeah, and every project on that list is going to be over or under to some amount, so we'll have a closeout process just like we do with the RFC and RE projects.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions on this?
Do you need any language carving out those projects listed in red?
Listed what?
Do you need any language carving out those projects that are listed in red as BOS approved?
Yeah, I think that was just meant to highlight the 570,000 of projects that if we approve it tonight, and I guess it's ultimately approved by the RTM on the 21st, will then come out of the Board of Selectmen's budget, because technically as we sit right now, those projects came to us both in the Board of Selectmen's budget, a capital budget, and in the ARPA allocation budget. So once approved by us and then the RTM on the 21st.
Right, reduce the budget by that amount.
Yeah, and that's about I think 8 or 9 mil,
Yeah, somewhere around there.
about 8 basis points
.08 mils.
0.08 mils, yeah. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, the next item is transfers. Thanks, John. And maybe just to get our sort of community volunteers here, is everyone okay if I flip-flop A and B to just move to the HHR consultant first? Okay, so the next item is going to be a transfer of $102.1 thousand to the Holmes, Hindley, and Royal Building Committee to cover the initial consultants. Chris Price is the chair of the HHR committee. Thank you very much. And Jill is here, who's a vice chair and also a member of the Board of Ed. Do you guys want to give us a little background on
Sure.
this?
And thankfully,
Chris, if you wouldn't mind.
oh,
just-
yeah, sure.
102.5, right? Right.
Yes, 102.5 thousand.
102,500. And thankfully, we have Dave Martin, who is doing double duty on the Board of Finance and also on the HHR committee, helping us with this, helping Jill and I in particular. As folks know, the HHR committee is charged with overseeing the renovation and additions to Hindley, Holmes, and Royal elementary schools. We're sort of on the same timeline 2 years later from what the Ox Ridge Building Committee has been doing in building a brand new elementary school at Ox Ridge. And thankfully, a lot of the work that the Ox Ridge Committee did has created effectively a template for us as we proceed on the HHR committee. Initially, what we're trying to do is we're working backwards from a June 30th deadline with the state. We have to have a state grant application filed by no later than June 30th to get that portion of state funds that'll be used for the overall project. One of the first things, at the suggestion of the folks from the Ox Ridge Committee, that we're doing is looking to retain a consultant to help us through the state grant process, through the paperwork, through the meetings with the state, through the various submissions, and also at the same time, because we have a fairly compressed time frame here, we're looking to start the RFP process for the architect engineer, and as well do some of the initial studies that need to be done at each of the sites, land surveys, hazardous, asbestos, PCB studies, all those types of things, which will then, where we're trying to get to is have the architects, engineers selected by mid-May so that they can generate pretty complete estimates for what the total cost of the projects are going to be, so that we can then come to the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, for approval for basically the full project amount, which we can then submit to the state to get what'll probably be somewhere between 4% and 7% of that total amount approved by the state. So short term, what we're here to talk to you guys about this evening is to see if we can get an allocation from the Board of Finance's capital contingency account of $102,500 to be able to sign up the state grant consultant, to pay the finalists in the architect selection process to do what are called charrettes, which are almost drawings. It's essentially a study, kind of a fairly detailed conceptual study that they will then be able to use as they price out the job, and to pay for the land surveys for the three schools, and to pay for the asbestos and PCB testing, and then some miscellaneous costs like town legal counsel to negotiate the architect's contracts, etc.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? There's like a really drunk guy downstairs in the parking lot going towards the gym. And he kind of scared the shit out of me.
Okay.
I just don't know if I should call the police. I just didn't want to, I didn't feel safe walking in my car.
Thank you, Jen.
And thanks. Thanks. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no. Anyway, so from a timing standpoint, we think we have the grant consultant identified. The plan is to make a recommendation to the committee on our regular meeting this coming Thursday. If we get the allocation from you folks, we would then have the authority to sign up the grant consultant so they can hit the ground running, as early as Friday or first part of next week. The architect RFPs are, the form of RFP is done. Kate Bush is sending out the request for proposals to the architectural community probably tomorrow. There's already been an ad placed in the paper, so we're up and running, and these funds are now, at the point where we need to be able to sign people up. So the looking forward from this initial request, and Dave knows this better than I do, but looking forward from this initial request, we would likely be coming back to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance in your April meetings, April 4th and 5th, to ask for the next round of funding, if you will. That would be part of a bond issuance, or a bond issuance that would allow kind of that initial part of funding somewhere in the $3 to $5 million range, and then from a timing standpoint, coming back for the balance of the request. Probably at that point in your May meetings, May 16th, May 17th, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance.
All of that aims to get all of that done in order for the RTM to vote at their June 6th meeting.
Right.
So that we can get the grant submitted. And what happened with the Ox Ridge situation was they, timing-wise, got it all done so that they got the charrettes. Each of the charrettes were different. The designs from each architect firm were different. They're fairly thoroughly detailed, and cost estimates. And so then the committee then utilized the combination of those three estimates to come up with the final estimate to go before everybody for the June process. Coming back to the boards for the April timeframe, that would be basically 1 month accelerated from what happened with the Ox Ridge project. In Ox Ridge, they came with the first bonding resolution request in May, but by doing it in the April timeframe, it sort of there's a difference between, we can't sign contracts until we have funds allocated, right? Which is why we're before you today, because we're ready to sign contracts to have services begin, right? My goal is to get the second, call it appropriation bonding resolution before everybody in April, so that before the invoices actually show up, that resolution is passed, so that we don't actually have to draw funds out of this contingency account. Okay. So mechanically, if it's approved tonight, Jen will create a sub-account off the capital reserve, right? And then it'll sit there, and if we get everything else done so that we come back and get the bonding resolution done, then it would replace this approval. Okay. And those funds would simply just be book entry back to the capital reserve.
Got it. So as I think about like the June 30 deadline where you need to have the application into the state,
right,
into their school construction program, you need to have the entire amount.
You need to have the entire amount, and that's what the Ox Ridge Committee relied on, the cost estimates that came with the charrettes, because the charrettes are fairly thoroughly designed documents that include price estimates, right? Where we are now with what the costs are is we have estimates from Northeast Architects that date back to 2019, right? So that's in this environment, that's maybe to the wild guess category. But by the time we get the charrettes and everything done, we're going to believe that those estimates are pretty closely refined. And in the case of Ox Ridge, so far, knock on wood, they actually are beneath, still running at a run rate beneath what the estimate for the total amount was.
And we recognize this is a different project, and there's maybe more complexity in this project because, one, it's 3 separate schools. 2, it's a renovation, it's not ground-up construction, so there's always complexity and things that turn up when you start taking walls down and see what existing conditions look like. So that's why we're trying to get this accelerated as best we can, so we can get the architects to start coming up with estimates, so we have, what a defensible number that makes sense.
And having pre-done all the environmental testing and updated surveys, because the surveys date to 1990s that we currently have. So having updated surveys and environmental testing and those types of things done will help the architects to be as accurate as possible, so that the charrettes that they produce will be as close in detail as possible for us.
Okay.
Jill, anything that you think that I missed that you'd like to add, or?
I missed half of it, so.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jill is protecting life and property.
I mean, Chris and David, as I recall, with Oxford and correct me if I'm wrong, when we vote on the big bonding resolution,
Right.
not the 100,000, not the 3 million,
Yeah.
the larger one, that's exclusive of any state grants because for us to apply for the state grant, we have to apply for we have to show them that we have an appropriation for the gross amount.
That's my understanding.
Even though, and so I think the number on Oxford was something like 66 million.
63.
63 million for Oxford. I don't know what the reimbursement.
The reimbursement, we're estimating is 4.3, I think, and the estimated cost, all-in cost right now remains below 60. Right.
So-
And Jen, just mechanically, we would intend to be back with the initial bonding resolution at the end of April, and then that resolution would be subsequently amended for the June meeting.
Right.
So mechanics wise.
Okay. And I think in terms of, this is technically 3 different projects, although we have you all, the building committee, doing, I guess, triple duty, because we have 1 building committee for all, so thank you. Do you have to track this all separately for each individual project in order to, because you're applying for 3 different grants, or?
Yeah, I mean, the consultant is going to give us guidance on that. We've had preliminary conversations there with the consultant about how they would approach this with the state. I think initially they think it's possible that there could be, because there's going to be some commonality. There may be some things that are duplicative and common, and that they could then, save time in that regard. At first, we're thinking, well, gee, can this be 1 submission with 3 appendices? And they're not optimistic that the state's going to let us do that. Honestly, I don't know the answer in terms of the town and with you folks as to whether we need to treat this as 3 separate appropriation requests. I guess I would ask that as a question. And we're sort of thinking about it as 1 project that's all going to be tracking at the same time with a single general contract construction manager.
Right, for our purposes, we don't need them as separate ones. But David and I had a little back and forth about this. I think it was with David. My recommendation is for this initial appropriation, because we don't know to what extent we have to track it. We have all of the vendors and itemize on their invoices which school it's for. And then working with the grant consultant, we'll know if we need to appropriate as 3, or if we just need to track it on our ledger as 3, or if we just need invoices broken down as 3. But we don't have that yet until we get further in with the grant consultant.
I'm sure people are going to want to track it as 3 separate projects once we actually get going. There may be different subs, for example, right? You may have subs that are necessary on 1 school that are not necessary on another school. So it's going to be different.
That'll just be 1 item that will have to be included in the bid for the construction contract, that you might need them to invoice a specific way so that we can track that way.
And is the idea for the architects that you try to get 1 architect to do all 3 schools?
Okay. 1 architect to do all 3 schools, go out for RFP from 10-ish architects, do the interviews, narrow it to 3. Each of those 3 produce charrettes. My understanding is for Oxford Ridge. The committee actually took design ideas from each of the different ones to come up with a consolidated final plan, and then move forward that way. With regards to the state grant, I think we're all aware that there have been some changes in the agency in Hartford, and I suspect, I didn't talk to Chris about this, so correct me if I'm wrong, I suspect that once we select and approve and hire a grant consultant, one of the early pieces of business will be for some members of the committee and the consultant to go to Hartford to meet with those folks to ascertain specifically how it has to be treated, verify what the potential reimbursement rates might be, and those types of things, because it's a little uncertain at this moment, just because of the changes that have happened up there.
But the consultants that we've talked to that have given proposals have all said that committee at Hartford they're functioning. I mean, they're looking at projects, they're functioning, they're still working their way through who's going to be in charge, but they're up and running, and we should be able to get in front of them.
And there's no reason to believe that the reimbursement would be largely different than the 4 to 7% rate.
Correct. That's what people's experience is.
And once you narrow the architects from 10 to 3 and ask the 3 to produce charrettes, they charge for that, correct? They're not going to do that work without getting paid to do that.
And that's part of this initial
one, so that we can actually go down the path full steam with, interviewing architects and, getting to that phase, because when we asked them to produce a charrette, in the Oxbridge case, they each got $10,000.
So we're using that number to budget 30,000 for 3 charrettes.
So we're using that same number as our estimate for that.
I'm unfortunately the only guy in the entire building who has never heard the word charrette. Somebody please define it?
I had never heard it until
It's like a mock-up.
yesterday.
It's like a mock-up. So
It's like-
somebody
It's
said,
Yeah.
something, I guess the best way I could describe it is it's something somewhat more detailed than a pure conceptual plan, but less detailed than a full construction drawing
It
plan.
won't be full construction drawings, but it'll be some type of proposal probably in the 30 to 40 page range for each one.
Design plans.
Design plans with, a mock-up in terms of where the physical footprint will be for any new additions, exactly how they're gonna repartition which rooms within the building to meet the changing ed specs for classroom sizes and accommodate the other requests that are built into the ed specs. Each of the schools, we have detailed ed specs for each of the schools separately. They are pretty similar, but not exactly the same, depending on the specific needs of the school per se. But all of the things in terms of minimum classroom size, minimum number of this type of room versus that type of room, those are all spec'd out, and those are all the same.
Well,
Just one last thing, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but from a high level, has there been any discussion about savings we might achieve because we're doing 3 projects at once? Like, I'm not that creative, I can't think, because we're doing all of it at once. Like, are there any economies of scale here, or, obviously there's that, but
I mean, I think that's part of what's built into the RFP for the architects, for them to identify where there can be efficiencies and savings, and how they're gonna staff what is essentially 3 projects that are all happening at the same time to achieve those kind of efficiencies. And we're also planning to have a single construction manager handle all 3 of them. And we're gonna be asking them the same thing.
So obviously, to the extent that there are any similarities between the buildings, right? If there are economies of scale from ordering one large order that is then divided amongst the 3 properties, because those elements are gonna be in each of the locations. But we'll certainly be asking the construction manager to, pursue those things.
And to the degree architects charge by the hour for some part of the work they do, in my understanding, if you have 1 meeting to discuss 3 projects versus 3 meetings to discuss 3 projects, you're going to save some money. Right, so.
yeah, and I think, I'm sure the architects, the ability to deal with one building committee of 8 or 9
Right.
people
It's a lot.
is easier than dealing with 3 different ones. So,
And-
John, I'm sorry.
So
So the next fellow who takes your job 40 years from now, when they do this again, will one of the architect specs to be to develop a set of as-built so that somebody knows what's behind the walls?
Well, there are as-built currently. They're
Okay.
older, as you can appreciate, because the last time these schools were worked on was,
The 80s.
I think, the
96, I think?
96 was the last, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Mike Lynch, who's the facilities director for the Board of Ed, has as-built, has the as-built scanned and uploaded. The architects that are gonna be proposing are gonna have access to those to be able to, that's kind of the best information we have.
Sure.
Right? We're not gonna let them start taking sheetrock down just yet. But yeah, there are as-built, they're just older. I mean, they're the age of the last renovations, but yeah, presumably that will be one of the deliverables from the architects will be, full as-built for all
Yeah,
of
I think
these.
in last year's budget, and Mike Lynch, correct me if I'm wrong, we appropriated a certain amount of dollars, or the Board of Ed, I should say, had built into their budget to upload and scan all of those ahead of this whole project. So, listen, I would say, $102,000 is relatively small, but this is a very large project. I would say, I think this is something that's been discussed among this community for 10 years back when they were called portables. I think they then turned into permanentables that were there for like many years, and I think this is, something that everybody certainly does. So I would say, do we have a motion to approve? Oh, let me just say one thing. This is going to come out of the capital contingency account. We have approximately 250 in there. This would bring it down to approximately 150, which is probably a little bit on the low end, but as I think David and Jen pointed out, this would sort of be a temporary sort of
So
hold
the backfill,
on that account, which would be cleared out and likely not actually depleted.
Just a couple observations. In my regular job, I went through this approximately 6 months ago. Applying for a grant, I applaud you for getting a grant consult because it's like tooth extraction. And the people in the state are not pleasant to deal with. Most of them they aren't, I'll tell you that. And most of them work remotely. And if you can get a face-to-face, I would appreciate that, both for you and for me. And you have to apply for a grant in the first 10 days of each month. And if anything is wrong, and I'll give you an example, one date was missing on a bond resolution or some other piece of paper that we submitted. We had to wait a whole month before applying again. And that's the type of bureaucracy you're dealing with in Hartford.
Yeah, and look, credit to the Oxbridge Committee for suggesting this. As I say, I can't say enough about, in effect, the legacy or the precedent or the cookbook, however you want to describe it, they've left for us. And that was really one of their very, very first suggestions was don't try to do this yourself. So.
I literally had to be 2 hours on the phone with this guy at the state walking me through their form as to what to fill out and what to attach.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, do I have a motion to approve the $102,500 from the Board of Finance capital contingency account? Taylor makes a motion, Paul seconds. All those in favor?
Thank you.
Chris,
Thank
Jill,
you.
David, thank you guys for the service. You guys
you.
are doing
Thank you.
yeoman's work here, so thank you.
And good luck.
Thank you. I keep hearing how long people have been talking about this. And I got involved in about 4 weeks ago.
You let us know who's reviewing to do, suggested you do this.
He's sitting up there. Thank you guys very much.
Energy drinks for life.
Thank you. Okay. This, next item on the, under the transfers is legal counsel.
Yep, legal is running a little hot. We have a few current cases that we know are going to cost us quite a bit. So the projection right now is that will be about $150,000 over budget. The good news is one of the other lines in our legal section, regulatory counsel, is running below budget, so we can transfer $100,000 from there, but we are requesting the additional $50,000 to come from contingency.
And Jen, what is our contingency, which started at 250, and what is that at now?
It is one.
122.
Yeah, that sounds right. 122,673 if you approve this 50,000.
50 or 150?
50 from contingency, 100,000 from another line.
Are these, in terms of where we're over, is there a certain category? Is it
It's-
land-related
No, the
proposals?
regulatory council is the land use
Yep.
area, so we're running better than budget on that. This is our general legal, kind of the all other category.
And the total, what is the total line item that we had budgeted for, like the other non-regulatory legal counsel?
I am drawing a blank on that. Yeah, that's all the combined, that's all the legal, regulatory and general. Off the top of my head, I don't have that number. I think we're usually around 700,000, but I'm not certain what we have in the current year budget.
Okay. Well, may I have a motion? Dan first. Rob seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is review of the budget process. The only real item which I had on here was, as you know, we're going into our next sort of 4 budget workshops, if you will, where we're going to slice up the various town departments, you know, and the Board of Ed, and sort of discuss a handful of those at each meeting. I sent around a sort of proposed with some changes. If you look at I could probably have labeled these better, but the second column from the right was the original, which we had, and then the third column from the right is what I'm proposing. The changes, which if this was in color you could see, we're really moving the library from the 29th to the 31st, moving the Board of Ed from the 31st to the 29th, just to move that up on our agenda, so the public could listen to our comment a little bit earlier, and to accommodate sort of scheduling. As you know, from at that meeting, we usually invite Dr. Adley, Rich, and you know the chair and vice chair usually attend to answer any questions we have during that discussion. The 29th is notably a little bit packed, but I would just point everybody to make sure you look at the bottom of the sheet right here where we have, you know, additional items on the 31st. So what I would say is take a look at this, you know, look at where you're assigned, and I welcome everybody's input if we should be moving anything from the sort of 29th to the 31st.
So just to be clear, as proposed, police, fire, public works, parks rec, Board of Ed, and debt service on the 29th, as proposed. Do you have that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we move any of that to the 31st? Is that what you're asking?
He's asking us. I think-
Yes.
Sounds like we should, right? That's a lot.
Yes, or we could move something up to the 22nd.
The 22nd, even though you have quite a few listed, they're all small.
Yeah.
The
So-
only challenge with moving things to the 22nd is that some of our partnership work with the RTM has already been completed with respect to budgets to be discussed on the 22nd. I'd be concerned with trying to schedule that on other departments that we're going to put on the 22nd, getting those questions to you and back from you. If we move a material department to the 22nd.
So what I would say is in terms of a couple things on the 29th, like, I mean, debt service, you know, that's more of a, this is what it is, because we have to pay it.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a lot of options there. There's, you know, relatively light discussion around the interest rates we're assuming for new bond deals, but it's, you know, it's pretty simple, so we could certainly move that to the 31st.
When do we need to make this decision, Jen?
If you're moving it later, it doesn't matter. Because we only need 48 hours to notice the meeting, so, and we're pretty generic on how we do the agenda, expected to include but not limited to.
Right.
So moving it later is no problem. And I think then you have a valid concern about moving forward to the 22nd.
Okay.
Why not
And-
move, like police or fire back to the 31st?
We could, and I mean, the other option would be to create another meeting. You know, I think we had originally had, I think in the previously, I think we had 2 meetings each week.
Right.
I think this was to try to get it into 3 ahead of the 5th, which is when we intend to vote on it, which, you know, I think by statute, we need to have it voted on by the 19th, which is the 3rd Tuesday in April. But the one prior to that is spring break.
Right.
I'd be okay moving police and fire to the 31st and then leaving the meeting schedule as is. Not adding additional meeting.
Okay.
And the 31st is now busy, but I think we need to set aside enough time to go through the school budget, right?
Yep.
So I'm hearing police and fire on the 31st, public work, park and rec will stay on the 29th, library the 31st, board of ed the 29th, debt service the 31st, and then those revenues on the 31st, correct?
Yeah.
I think the one thing we did learn is that there's some travel at the top of the police department. So before we formally schedule that, we should just check in to make sure that, I think at
I
least,
think the 29th was the day that Don was away.
I think that's right. I
So
don't
he
know
probably
that.
prefers the 31st.
Yeah. So if he's back for the 31st, that might be perfect.
Yeah. I'll confirm with him tomorrow.
And then when you do that, can you just send an update one to all of us?
Sure.
Thanks.
Although if he's not available, he did have full confidence in his captains.
And that's what I was getting at, is make sure the captains are, because I think one of those is, yeah, right. As long as they can attend it, we move to the 31st.
Okay, so who's going to check on police?
I'll check on that.
Okay. And I think with respect to fire, I mean, we can talk about, do we want to, do we need to have one of the commissioners here? I would just say, when you look outside of their operating budgets, it's primarily capital. And I thought, a lot of us were at the firehouse tour, and I thought, I guess I would just say, I'd put pause, I'd say very much like thank you to what is close to 200 different volunteers at these 3 different fire departments and the fire commission. I mean, it was, not that I ever doubted it, but it was eye-opening to see the amount of sort of detail and work that they do and sort of how they run these facilities and so forth. And maybe kind of kick myself that we didn't maybe do this previously and so forth, but I thought it was very helpful to kind of really see and touch and hear what a lot of the capital was. So I'm not sure, we can talk about, I could see if perhaps Scott or one of the fire chiefs were available, if we have questions there, but.
I think it would be a good idea. I mean, we're asking the police to provide representation when we discuss there, so it would be treating them consistently, and they have not historically. And to be honest, I came away from the tour this weekend being very impressed with what I saw. So I think it will help the community relations, if you will, for them to get a little more publicity as well.
Okay, I'll reach out to them.
We should probably invite all 3, right? They're all
Yeah.
kind of.
Right.
Yeah, I'll invite each chief or like his representative and the fire commissioner.
And are we talking trucks that night, or are we talking trucks a different night?
Well, usually in all of these, it's both the operating budget and the capital related to
Capital budget,
each line item, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Jim, I'll probably be late for the meeting on the 22nd.
Okay. Then maybe what we'll do is we'll just make sure I put general government that you and Dan are working on. You sort of last there.
That's pretty small.
Next item is the financial report.
Property taxes, our main revenue source, are consistent with prior years, so we have no reason to be concerned about that one. We've collected 99.85% of the budget. The other revenues, I've called out that the parks program fees through February collected $745,000 of their $665 budget. Said it before, we'll be back for an appropriation of the unanticipated revenues to support the additional expenditures that go along with more people in programs. Building permits down towards the bottom, we've taken in $147,000 this year on the redevelopment projects. We budgeted $379,000, so that is coming in close to budget, as we would expect for this time of year. On the expenditure side, kind of towards the middle of page 2, hydrants and water mains. We have a $500,000 budget. We do have a 1-month lag in our billing, but we received notification, and this happens every year. They increase rates, change their surcharges at different times throughout the year. So the regular rate is for a calendar year. We have the new rate on that, and I'm going to calculate what we need. But there's also a couple of changes to their various surcharges that are before the Utility Regulatory Board. So those may have an impact not only on fiscal '22, we may fall short in that because of these changes, but I'm also doing a projection and see if we need to increase what the request is in fiscal '23.
So I think the rates are going up, not down.
Yeah.
And I actually had a question very recently from a resident on this, and I guess it's about the amount of money we spend on fire hydrants. It's really, these rates are basically set by the state that Aquarian charges you. It's like per linear foot of.
Inch foot.
What?
Inch foot.
Per inch foot of pipe and per water hydrant and so forth. So it's a flat rate across the state and so forth for, effectively what is generally like a lease, if you will, like a wet lease of each individual. We just pay a certain amount per inch.
I don't know if I should agree to that.
Don't speak.
I don't know how I would characterize it other than that we get the bill, we have to pay it, we have no control over what they charge us.
You can run a letter to Public Utilities Commission.
Right, and
They
I think
rate hearings all the time.
they have one scheduled to be heard, one of their changes scheduled to be heard tomorrow. Their letter said they have another proposal that they anticipate putting forward for April, another one for July. They're very busy requesting things. We talked about legal, we have a transfer for that. But the rest on the expenditure side is looking pretty good. I did mention last week that last meeting, in our employee benefits, we've had a lot of retirements. But we're just waiting to see if we can capture any of the savings from the vacancies to offset the accrual payouts that we had to make. On page 4, state revenues, we expect to get more than our budget on educational cost sharing. Every year they true up ECR from the prior year, and the plus or minus comes to us through the ECS. And we are getting, I think it's about another $50,000 for the ECR true up from last year. And then towards the middle of the page, the excess cost reimbursement, we've received our first payments, $2,261,000, and that's 75% of the total that we will receive. So we expect to receive just over $3 million in ECR. BOE submitted a claim of just under $3.7 million.
And what was the reimbursement rate on that? Was it 80, or Paul, do you know, was it 80%? Because I saw something.
It's 81.28.
Okay.
I
Which
saw
I-
an email, Dave.
Which I
That's
think,
definitely
which I think they had budget, the Board of Ed budget, I think had 75 built into it.
And that's even on the high side.
Mm.
Normally it's between 70 and 75.
Okay.
But the whole pool for the state is stated at 140 million for over 10 years.
Why do we think it's going up? And why are our reimbursement rates going up?
It depends on The number of cases and the severity of the cases. Yeah.
Well, there's a,
Restate the question.
the good news is that
Crazy.
the good news is that there's a proposal in front of the state that Senator Looney has put forward to put more money into the ECR fund and drive it up from the 140.6 million that it's currently
Yeah,
at.
but
Right.
that's-
The bad news is that he's trying to do
Taxes on your
that
house.
with a statewide mill rate of 2 mills on every home that's assessed at about 1.2 million.
Congratulations.
So that would, so for the small increase that we would get on the
I
ECR,
don't mind
residents in Darien would get a 12% property tax increase, so.
that. Yeah, it'd take about 60 million to close the gap.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a no-brainer if you're a legislator, because it's a goodwill type of
They're
thing.
spending 90 million on
HVAC, which has all kinds of
on
things.
gas sales tax.
I mean,
Subsidy.
we should repeat that, 12% increase in property taxes.
12, the 2 mill
Yeah. represents
gauged
12%.
against approximately a 16.8% mill here for all homes assessed at above 1.2 would be a 12% increase.
And is it on the incremental value above 1.2 or on the whole thing?
No, on the whole thing, as proposed.
I thought it was only increment. I'll look at it again.
No, it was on all homes assessed above.
Wish more people would listen to this meeting.
Okay,
So-
page 5.
So Jen, sorry, before you go, so 2.261 in, we're expecting 3,
Yes,
so we're gonna be roughly 800 over budget?
right. But they had 6 more students than they anticipated, so I'm sure their expense side is up on that too.
And we think it's a combination of a higher reimbursement rate, and to Paul's point a little bit, the cases could be more severe than we anticipated?
Yeah, it's that blend of those factors.
And we don't ask them to prove that they need the money.
Page 5.
On that note.
Yeah.
Page 5, the Board of Finance Capital Reserve, middle of that top row, after the HHR transfer, $150,000, but like we said, we actually expect that that'll flow back into the Board of Finance Reserve. And before we wrap up the budget, I'll be bringing to you another round of RFC and RE closeouts so that we know if there's anything that you might want to move from reserve and apply towards the fiscal '23 budget. Right now, it's probably a little over 300,000 of closeouts that I'll be bringing to you, just to give you a sense of where that number might end up. Sewer fund and parking fund, nothing really different from the last month.
Sorry, the balance in the capital reserve after the transfer today is 122, right?
That's regular contingency is 122, capital reserve is 150.
Are we seeing pickup in pay stations at all?
A little bit.
Yeah.
With Omicron, kind of in the rearview mirror, we're seeing a little pickup in pay stations. Not much pickup in tickets, but definitely a little bit in the pay stations.
Yeah, I went by Norotan Heights today. I think that's the most cars I've seen in
Yeah.
like 2 years.
I mean, yesterday was pretty empty.
Today was,
Yeah.
Mondays and Fridays are empty,
Yeah.
Tuesdays and Thursdays are jammed.
And then the last few pages, 8, 9, 10, 11, are our capital projects. So you'll see in here now, bond proceeds are increased. We've eliminated those cash deficits that we had with our most recent bond issue that we closed on it and got our funds on February 24th. What I will be doing now is going through all of our outstanding authorizations. And any projects that are complete and that we didn't utilize the full bond authorization, I'll be bringing the appropriate resolution to you to rescind the authorization so they no longer hang out there as authorized but unissued. And
Are there any unutilized proceeds from a bond issue that expire, and then if so, what happens to those proceeds?
so the ones that I'm keeping my eye on right now, we have to true it up with the Board of Ed, are the 2 roof projects. One of them we fully bonded based on their input. They haven't even fully expended it, and they are now expecting a state grant on the Holmes roof. So we borrowed $1,020,000 20,000, they've only spent 793. And if we got another 70,000 of state grants, we would have another 70,000 of surplus bond proceeds. Hinley Roof is a similar situation, but we didn't bond the full amount, so we can true those up and we would transfer the excess bond proceeds that we actually issued to another Board of Ed project. So once we have the HHR initial authorization, we could, if we determine we have excess proceeds here, I can bring a motion to you guys to transfer the proceeds from the roof projects to HHR, and then we'll borrow that much less on HHR.
Could we, if we're able to true that up, could we offset the contingency, or the capital contingency that we're funding?
No, we can only transfer them to another authorized bond project.
Thank you.
Or I guess technically, we could also, I think, use those to pay debt service down if we wanted.
Yes.
Which could alleviate anything this year, or we can sort of spread it out between the two, right?
Right. My recommendation, though, would be we just move it to another project, and then we don't need to borrow that amount for that project.
Yeah, I mean, we borrow those at lower cost,
Right.
lower cost of funds, so.
Right.
Thank you.
This is probably a dumb question, but since we approved 63 million RTM for the Oxford project, we didn't bond.
No, we've only bonded 40, we actually issued about 47.7, and we got premium of 4.6. So we have about,
47.7, right?
yeah,
Oh, no.
40, we issued, actual bond proceeds is 47.7. Bond premium is 4.6, and then we're expecting the 4 million of state grant. So that's one where we'll end up having to rescind the authorization because we don't want however many millions of dollars sitting out there that say that it's authorized but unissued.
Right.
So once that project is complete, a year or so from now, when the state grant is done, we'll be able to do
And we'll
that.
still have to fund the remaining portion between the 47 and the state grant and wherever we land
Right,
on the total.
whatever the
project.
final expenditure is.
Which is good, right now is estimated probably around $8 million delta between what we've funded and what we've yet to fund.
With the most recent issue, based on the cash flow that the building committee gave us and that Kip presented, we issued as much as they expect to spend. Between that and the state grant, the utility rebate.
So that's 47.7 plus 4 and change.
Well, it's
So
40
we've taken in about 53.7 of revenue, and we're expecting another 2.6 of state grant.
Okay, got it. Yep.
So 55, 56
Yep.
million total revenue.
Yep. Okay.
But that's our next steps on bonded capital, and that is all I have for the report.
Okay, special assignments? And
We
then,
got approval of minutes on here.
oh, sorry, all right, approval of minutes from the February 15th meeting, thanks, Joe.
I'm sorry, I haven't got the other ones out yet.
Do you want a motion?
Yeah. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Dan moved, Rob seconded, all in favor of the February 15th minutes? Unanimous? Okay, next item is special committees. I know we talked a lot about HHR.
You can tell that we're running as hard as we can. My expectation is I've come up with a way to estimate what the initial bonding resolution amount would be, but we are trying to sort of triangulate that with a second methodology to make sure we are comfortable. But in any case, we would hope to be before the Board of Finance again at the April 5th meeting.
Okay.
Does that work with the voting on the budget? Because
Um,
our discussions should be done by then, right?
If you have it before then, Kate and I were talking, Board of Selectmen is meeting on March 28th, and she can put it on that agenda. So we could put it on as early as the 29th if we want to get it done so that we know that we can move it forward
Okay,
to
well,
rules.
I'll talk to Chris about that tomorrow then, because, you know, theoretically, we could go with the initial methodology that I had, because we know that that number is ultimately coming from the bigger number that should come from more detailed architectural estimates, you know, down the road anyway. It's a consolidated, you know, concept. So, I've been consulting with Kate on this, and the idea is we want to make sure that we get enough in the first round, because it needs to cover the architect and initial construction manager fees in order for us to be able to sign the contract with the construction manager, who will be the next phase, right? And the construction manager fees are not consequential.
Dan, anything on Oxford?
Nothing really new. We did the school tour before the firehouse tour on Saturday, the annual school tour. And I think it was great for people in the community and the boards to see just how much progress has been made there. I mean, it's one thing to know on paper what percent is complete. It's another to walk hallways and see classrooms and library and all that kind of thing. So we didn't have a particularly great day to do it. It was a little bit wet and nasty, but at any rate. So, and there's pictures that I'm happy to send around. Every month in the Oxbridge Building Committee meeting, we get a progress report from AP and SLAM, and they provide pictures with kind of updates on the construction. So all good.
Okay. Anyone else? Paul, pension?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
IT, nothing, waiting for the next meeting.
Okay. I think nothing on audit. We closed that out, I think, a meeting and a half ago, so. Okay. Chairman's remarks. I think I would maybe just kind of highlight, and just so the public is aware, a couple changes. We're all back to sort of in-person meeting now. There were 7 of us up here. As you probably saw from our, from our agenda, what we're going to be taking public comment at every one of our meetings, regardless, including all of the budget meetings that'll begin to occur, over 1 or 2 per week for the next few weeks. I invite, the public, elected officials, anyone that wants to give public comment on, particularly on the items that we're discussing that day, to kind of come in. Our public comment grants everybody, 3 minutes, to speak to us, and I think it's important that we hear it, before we actually take items or discuss certain topics. And we've also included notes on our agenda that we welcome the public to email us public comment. We received 1 in connection with this meeting, which we've told everybody, and I'll tell the public that we're going to include on our minutes when they're published and uploaded to the town's website. So they'll be permanently sort of included in the record of the meeting. So that's really it. I think, that's it from my side. Is there any other business? Okay, having none, is there a motion to adjourn? Dan so moved. Rob seconded. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.